with them or not, but generating souls. Okay? So let's pray first. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for the privilege that is ours to study your word, to study the language that your word was originally written in the Old Testament. We know that there's much to be seen there that can't be seen in the English text, and that's not to say anything negative about the English text, just to point out that reality that your word and these languages cannot transfer all the data across perfectly. And we pray that as we go through these sessions, that you will help us to focus attention, to grasp the main ideas, and be able to develop some skills, and most importantly, to really understand the reason why it's important. And we just pray for each one of these students, and we pray that they will be able to give the time and energy to it and accomplish this in good order. Pray for Sean, wherever he is, and ask the blessing of God. We pray this in Christ's name. Okay, first thing I want to do is to look at the syllabus. Okay, just talk a few things through with respect to the syllabus, and if there's any questions, and this is the time to ask, of course. You can see what the course description is, pretty standard course description, with the exception that I'm emphasizing diagramming. That should be pretty exciting for you. Term or textual analysis, which is something that I think Dr. Stanley was teaching you about, right? I don't know how much you did or what level you did. You'll have to communicate that to me if you want. I'll get to that point. And textual criticism, as you know, that as you look at your Hebrew Bible, you see that there are all kinds of little, things on the side margin that are textual issues, and on the bottom margins. We need to learn how to read that, and to learn how to interpret that, and therefore make this textual decision. One of the things that's different about Hebrew, the Hebrew Bible, as opposed to the Greek Bible, is that the Greek Bible is a Bible made up of a combination of manuscripts. So the text is not just one text, one manuscript, right? It's composite. Hebrew Bible, the one we have here, is basically one manuscript. Of the 1,000 so manuscripts of Hebrew, that's one. Okay? We'll talk more about that at a time. But that means that the textual criticism here is going to be different than it would be if we were working in the New Testament. And word studies, we all know the importance of word studies. In fact, in some people's mind, word studies is the whole game when it comes to exegesis or interpretation. Well, that really isn't the case. I mean, it's not the whole game, but it is a big part of the game. Okay? So we need to learn how to do that well and not make mistakes. There are a lot of mistakes made in word studies. Those mistakes find their way into sermons and books and student papers and sometimes prof papers, etc., etc. Figurative language. We will emphasize figurative language. Figurative language is of two kinds, we shall see. One is the common thing, like, simile, metaphor, But there are other kinds that I call rhetorical figures, where you don't have your normal construction, just as an example, and you construct a sentence in a different way so that you can emphasize different things. And that is very important because it occurs a lot. What kind of language you expect to find a lot of figurative language in poetry or in prose? Which one? Poetry? Right. Check your head, yes. That's right. You would. You also find it, however, in prose. But approximately 50% of the Hebrew Bible is poetry. That makes a different story now when it comes to figurative language in the Old Testament as opposed to the New. And then we have literary genres. Narrative, poetry, prophecy, etc. Right? And there are specific rules, if you will, for approaching that kind of literature. We do that all the time. We just don't think of those terms, you see. We approach a newspaper article with a certain set of rules that we bring to it without even verbalizing them. We approach a comic book with a different set of rules. So we do it all the time, and so we need to look at that and make sure we're doing it right. And so, from the Exegesis point of view, we want to be able to comprehend the functions and procedures. Comprehend is a little bit different terminology than simply become aware of or be knowledgeable about. Comprehend means you have knowledge, you gain the knowledge, but now you're also able to process that knowledge. And the next level, actually, would be the application level. Be able to do something with it. You're going to have an opportunity to do that, of course. But before you can do that effectively, you've got to comprehend the functions and procedures. Right? And here's the application. Then apply them. That would be do something in the text, interpretation, right? And then we need to demonstrate personal abilities in these things that we talked about that we're emphasizing. So you need to learn not only the basic principles, but actually be able to do something. Okay? And we're going to have some time to practice that do it here. Okay. So we'll get into that today, where we got 4 days. Right? 4 days. Okay. And then you understand the genre-specific principles. Understand there's application involved too there, but it's not quite the same level of intellectual or cognitive attainment there. However, as we shall see when we get into it, if you simply understand the way in which you approach this kind of literature, okay, then you'll do it, then it'll work out properly, and the comprehension, the applications to all of that is what goes in before we finalize it in the genre side. Let's see about that too. Okay. Have it here. Oh, yeah, okay. So those are some basic objectives. Hopefully we will succeed in all of that. Requirements, well, you got some readings in the textbook. I've got them listed for you. I'll talk about that in a minute. Old Testament translations, I indicated that for you what to translate. I checked to see what the syllabus for Dr. Stanley had to make sure I didn't give you the same passages, which I didn't, unless he went beyond the syllabus. A little bit.
We did the first few songs.
Did you?
Song numbers.
Did you do Psalm 1? Good. That'll give you a jump on it there because that's something that will get into specific depth there. But the other ones maybe not. See. Class sessions involvement, what that means is I talk, you listen. No, not exactly that way. We talk. Okay, I'll talk, but we need to interact here. Okay. Especially since we're only going to have these two seminars. We'll call it seminars. So we need to process things here. Okay. And you know, I have an exegetical paper. I will give you the details on that later. And by the end of this session, seminar here, okay, I will give you the text upon which you will do your paper. Okay, so you'll have it before you come back next time. By the time I leave. And then I'll give you a final exam by email. What do you think the final exam might include? Probably some of that stuff up here. Okay. Any questions on that? Or it's pretty simple, isn't it? Okay, here's the readings. Now I'm going to do a little different here. Well, these are the readings here. This book, where is this book? This book here. Okay, we're going to use this when we get into the textual criticism part. Okay, so we'll be using this as an open book, work through the issue here. Okay, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to do Lord willing, we're going to work all of the textual problems in the book of Ruth. Okay, so work through this book then, in the book of Ruth, and learn how to do it in the process. Okay? But the others are readings that you need to do ahead of time, which I'm presuming you already did. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then this here, of course, is you gotta Now I've modified it, so there will be some changes that, but it will be pretty clear as to what they are. Keep modifying everything. Okay, so paper requirements, do a narrative passage story, if you will. But that will be I'll give you the details on that later. Format according to school standard for papers, which is, anybody know?
SPL.
Right. And he has copies in the office if you need them. Okay? No more than 10 to 15 pages in length. Okay? So I didn't put that in there one time. I'm expecting about a 10-page exegetical paper, and a student came traipsing up the stairs with a 250-page paper for me to read. Ever after, I decided, no, I'm going to put a limit on it.
250.
Yeah. Got me excited about it. This was back in Oregon. Back in
Colorado?
Western Seminary when I was teaching up there for them. And my office was on the second floor, so we had to walk up a couple of flight of stairs to get there. And lo and behold, he dropped that off, but then he had to go in for back surgery. So I don't think that was the reason, but anyway, it was kind of learning experience on my side. Okay, so what we're looking for in a paper is evidence of comprehensive involvement with the method taught in the course. Okay, evidence That does not mean, every little thing the way in which we're going to necessarily do it. But if something is significant that in your passage, that you show evidence that in fact you dealt with, for instance, a textual problem. If there's a textual problem in there, I suspect I will want to see that you have dealt with it, right? And resolved it before you interpreted the text. You got to know what text you got before you can interpret it. Okay. And then, of course, as in all courses, there's an unfortunate aspect of grading. You're not going to be late, so we won't worry too much about that, Tim. There's some grade reduction. That's just there for poor students, and there aren't any here, right? Old Testament translations, that's important because we're going to be working in these translations to work out our method. Okay. Of course, be involved, that's an easy one. Just open your mouth periodically and say something. That's involvement. Of course, when I ask you a question, then that's involvement too. And your exegetical paper, which kind of puts a summary to the whole process a little bit, and show your ability to deal with the whole process. And then the final is going to be pretty much showing your ability to deal with the things that we focused on in particular, skill-oriented things that we emphasize. Okay, so we've got tentative schedule. Now you'll notice that I have your administrative reading reports and interaction. I'll ask you about the reading, but I'm gonna take it as I was thinking at first. That's just too much reading to interact with at one point because we'll interact for an hour and it'll be done, and you'll forget what we interacted with and what you read. So I'm going to take. We're going to interact with everything that we're supposed to, that we did read, in fact, by Friday. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, of course. But we will do parts of it. So today we will interact with up to page 18, I think. That's page 18.
Oh, in your notes?
In the book. In the book.
Oh.
The book.
This book.
This is the reason. Yeah. Okay, and then we'll take some more on Thursday and some more on Friday, and we'll be done with that. I think that'll be better than what I said here. Now, what I said here, my booklet, page numbers are going to be different even sometimes. A couple places the sequence is going to be different. But so these pages may not reflect your pages, but we'll make sure that we've got the right places. The titles are the same. So you can deal with that. Okay. So this weekend, and this could be adjusted. I mean, we get really slowed down somewhere along the line, which we could right in here, and we're not going to finish all that today. It's not already. We'll bleed over into some of the others. But by the time Saturday is finished, we will have completed this section. Okay. That's the plan. Any questions on it? And then there's February. Okay. Questions? Simple one. Too easy. Well, that's why you don't have to pay so much for these tuition in these courses. They're so easy. Okay. If there's no questions, what I want to do first is I want to interact with the textbook. Okay? Do you have one? Yeah, we have one.
We have one of those at home.
What?
One of those. This is they grab the. Grab the guys.
The wrong one.
Not the chisel. So.
Okay. Now let me ask you this you did your reading, right? Okay. No. So where we're going to start is on page 7, of course. Okay, and we'll go to page 18 today. Okay. Now, this first section is broken down into these various subtitles here. The necessity of using your Hebrew Bible. Now, if you were to ask a seminary trained individual, there are some non-typical ones out there, but a typical seminary trained individual who went through seminary 10 years ago and been in the ministry 10 or more years, pastoral ministry. And if you were to ask the question, do you find it necessary to use your Hebrew Bible? What do you think a typical answer would be?
No.
No?
Most of the people I've talked with about original languages usually say something to the effect of sometimes I use my Greek, but I haven't touched Hebrew since I graduated.
What would you say to them if you felt, and maybe you don't, by the end of this course, hopefully you will, feel that it's necessary? What would you say to them? What would you give them a reason for? What would be a reason that you would give?
Reason for the necessity of it?
Yeah. Or why you should do it. Okay. Say I'm the person. Okay. I haven't used my Hebrew Bible since I left seminary, except as a doorstop, Okay? I didn't find a need for it. All right? Counter that.
We're supposed to do that now. We haven't went through the course yet.
No. Give some reason. Is there a reason why?
Well, like you prayed, the whole concept of not being able to understand or even see all the data available.
Okay.
So being able to really get a first-hand glimpse at what is our best compilation of the original.
Okay. Anything else? If he's not using his Hebrew Bible, what is he probably using? English. Some translation, right? Is there something you could counter his I don't need the Hebrew Bible in respect to this concept of translations?
Knowing which version is completely adequate. As for the English language in and of itself isn't necessarily adequate in translating from language to language.
Much the same as what Cyrus was talking about. There's something more basic, probably.
Different interpretations.
Right. You can take two translations, English translations, to some passage in the English Bible, in the Old Testament. And the translations would have different interpretations, right? There are different meanings for the words. How are you going to evaluate which translation has got it right? Now, if you were to ask the person in question, how do I evaluate? What do you think my answer might be? Remember, I'm a 10-year plus graduate here, and I'm a successful minister now, you see. Okay. What do you think my answer might be?
Have the majority text view of my commentaries, whichever interpretation most agree on. Don't call that good.
Or maybe you have a really good computer program that might help you. You can look at a word every now and then and make sure.
Can computer programs interpret the text?
Nope.
So that don't help that probably, right?
But it makes me feel good because these computer programs are really
They cost a lot of money. You got Probably the answer would be something like this. Old Testament, there are many Old Testament scholars who have worked for years and years, and they have then produced translations that are, we should say, not only adequate, but we should say accurate, very, very accurate. And so, we use a translation that is, from an evangelical perspective, done by noted scholars in the field, and we can trust the translation. And those few places where the translations were different, the good translations, well, there's a couple of good commentaries out there that can, cut through it and help me determine that decision, right? So you see, I don't need anybody. Do you think he really does need anybody? It's interesting the way in which Chisholm develops this a little bit. One of the things is what you mentioned, Cyrus, in part at the very end of the second paragraph. You never see that? Some drop Hebrew requirements. They're talking about schools now, while many others opt for a Hebrew Light program that requires only a bare minimum of linguistic study and naively, this is the key, I think, here to the statement, naively stresses the use of tools as if they can somehow mysteriously make one a competent interpreter. The problem with that idea of the tools is that there's an assumption somewhere along the line that the tool itself can give me the interpretation. It can't. The only thing that the tools can do is give me some, not all, but some of the data that I can use to create or make an interpretation. Okay? Right? That's what the tools can do. Interestingly enough, computer tools, sometimes they don't even give you the right data. Okay. Because there are some things that they can't distinguish between. And you can see some of those later on, I think. There's another issue, I think, involved, and he's talking about schools that have kind of cut down the requirements for Hebrew Greek as well, for that matter. There's a couple of reasons for that. Pragmatic reasons. Good old American philosophy, pragmatism. And one of those is not here, of course. Some students basically go to school to get the degree and to get the credentials, not necessarily to get the education. And some of them, it's no, I don't. but it's not. I can tell you from 30 plus years of teaching, there are a lot of students out there who don't care about what they learn just so they get an A in the course. That's it. That's not here, of course. So school, because students complain about the difficulty from the language side and stuff, they can always choose to go to a school that doesn't have that level of difficulty because they're out there, you see. And so, from the standpoint of just pure and simple competition, right, what happens? Try to ease the pain, if you will, for the student so that the student will stay. Right? What we've got then is a lowest common denominator coming into play, you see. And that's not in the sense of elevating the educational standard, but to diminish the educational standard. But it happens. Okay? Here's an interesting illustration for you. When I was teaching at Phoenix Seminary, some of the students were, I don't know if you want to call it complaining, but indicating that yes, this is Greek in particular, the languages were the hardest parts of their curriculum, and that bothered them. That it was so hard. And so, for a while, they said the administration came to me and said, what we want you to do is devise a course for Greek where you can emphasize the tools. Okay? Don't make them work so much on memorizing words and paradigms and this and that. Of course, I complain about that. But if I wanted to keep working, then I just go ahead and do it, right? Well, I did it. And here's an interesting thing. After that sequence, that first group of students came through, and then they had their exit interviews, right? Their exit interviews. Almost to the person, one of the issues they had was, what could we do better, was, I didn't learn enough languages. Because I felt that the language program didn't give me the kind of skill that I need even to evaluate what the profs were talking about in theology class sometimes. They came back to me later and said, maybe we ought to rethink.
Devise a course where you emphasize the use of the languages instead of the tools. To have you devise a new course where you learn the language.
Yeah, right. So at any rate, there's a reality out there that students do realize the importance, even if they can't always have the time, to give to it, to really be able to master it by the time they're done with the seminary curriculum. And that's part of the problem, it seems to me. See, part of the problem, it seems to me, is not just lazy students out there who graduate and become pastors, and they're lazy pastors because they've lost their ability in language. I don't think that's it. I think in part the problem is at the seminary itself, wherein our curriculum is such that by the time the student graduates, the skill level in language had not developed high enough so that it's relatively easy to keep moving and independently progress, And so they don't have the time to do some of the stuff in the pastorate that they need to do to keep it up. And I think the problem is they just They didn't get enough. Not that they got too much. They didn't get enough. So that it wasn't something that they could easily manage within their time constraints in the pastoral and well, that's just my own philosophy there. I think that's the case. The importance, I'm looking at page 8 in the notes here, I mean in the book. Page 9 on the very bottom of the first paragraph, one of the most basic exegetical skills are developed, and the student is rarely, if ever, shown how exegesis impacts interpretation, let alone sermon preparation. To see how it impacts interpretation means you have to really get into the details of it, right? And to expose it. You have seen in my notes periodically, we'll run through some of these, the discovery things. Well, the whole purpose of those is to show students that there's a reason to study this, a reason to master this, because there is truth there that you can't see any other way. Okay? So that's the number one thing that seems to me that needs to be done in the training, right from the very first Hebrew class, all the way through to the end. Demonstrate why you need it, right? Work on the motivation side. And if we can tell an individual, use the Madison Avenue approach, hey, we can sell you on you need this, this brand new automobile. You'll sell your mother to buy it, That's how it works. If you need it bad enough, you're going to get it. So I got to sell. All the way through, it needs to be sold. Okay? Otherwise, it's easy to give up on the hard thing if you're not sold on why you need it. But if you're sold on why you need it, it's amazing how much the hard thing isn't quite as hard. So that's really, I think, the key. Okay? This book, he says, is designed for a second-year seminary Hebrew course. What's involved in a second-year seminary Hebrew course? Well, the first year is grammar. Second year would be basically what you did with syntax. Okay? And if you thumb through, I don't know if you have, on the latter part of it, well, no, you haven't read it yet. That, a lot of it deals with the syntactical element. All right? Next, second year stuff. What we're dealing here is going beyond the second year, of course, into what would be most classical as a third year. Okay? You need both the grammar and the syntax understanding as building blocks for interpretation level here, broader level. Okay? So that's what this course is all about. Okay? There are some philosophical things in this first chapter here, and why do you need the bucket trend? Why you need the bucket trend? Well, there's a question he asks here. Without credibility and competence, do we have the right to stand before God's people and proclaim His word in an authoritative tone? You can put it another way, in a more typical way. There are a lot of people who proclaim in an authoritative tone, but they haven't really established their credibility, competence to do so. See, it's kind of like that old joke, preachers, I'm a teacher, sometimes use, well, if it's a weak point in your outline, if it's a weak point, get the pulpit, bang on the pulpit, emphasize it that way because, well, that's kind of pathetic, isn't it? I encourage you, this is not to be critical, but this is for your own profit, I think. Because when you listen to sermons, hopefully you're not daydreaming, you're listening to sermons, and I have to work on that so I can assume maybe somebody else has a problem every now and then. Okay. Don't just listen to the words, but listen to the significance of the message of the words. There are a lot of preachers who say nothing beautiful. In other words, you stop and you say, that was a wonderful sermon. And you analyze, you step back for a second and analyze what significance was said, what a spiritual significance was said. And you have to say it's too often. You could write it on a postage stamp. It's like a political speech. You listen to 45 minutes of a political speech and you try to get what is significant that was said. And sometimes you have trouble filling up a postage stamp. But it was said beautifully. Moving on about what? So, unfortunately, there are people who sound very authoritative, but they frankly don't have the data, they don't have the truth behind them to do that. And sometimes I get so upset on TV, especially some of those TV preachers. All good ones too. I mean, with names and stuff. You listen to them, and you listen to them using a particular text. You say, how in the world did you get this out of that? This. You just have to say, well, he didn't get it from the text, so he must have imposed it upon the text somewhere along the line. But people just don't think that way. Okay? Here's the statement, one cannot preach credibly, that means with believability, and competently from the Old Testament without a working knowledge of Hebrew and basic exegetical skills. Page 10. That's a pretty hefty statement if you stop and think about it. Then you ask the preacher who stopped using it as soon as he graduated from seminary, you read that to him and say, did you ever preach from the Old Testament? Well, you can't preach credibly and competently without some basic Hebrew skills. Right? Do they have ever preached from the Old Testament? Sure. Yeah. Okay. Here's what we mentioned before. He makes a statement, translations and commentaries differ frequently and sometimes significantly in their interpretation of the text. We expect commentaries to be interpretations, but you know what? The mainline person in our pews out there doesn't think of translation as an interpretation. They don't. And yet every translation is an interpretation. Right? But they don't think of that in those terms. Okay? And they need to be taught. Superficial use of tools. We're going to see some tools this weekend. Superficial use of tools makes one more dangerous than competent when interpreting the Old Testament. So those who say, well, let's emphasize the tools approach and minimize the memorization and all that hard stuff. Well, they produce more dangerous people than competent people. So, you just be careful. Tool, recognize what the tool is. Okay? Page 11. How can this book help you become a credible, competent, and confident interpreter of the Old Testament? that word, we understand what credible means, believable, okay, and competent, yeah, you're doing things right. Confident, that's an important word, I think, at least in my vocabulary when it comes to this, as well apparently the person here, okay. Confidence in what you're saying and proclaiming, whether it be teaching Sunday school or preaching or whatever it is, being confident that you've looked at the data, you evaluated the data that's there, and you're confident that you've got an adequate, not perfect interpretation here. And one that would fly in the face of somebody else's interpretation, but you're confident because you've done it. Right? It's amazing how two people can look at the same text. Okay? One of them looked at it by, going through all the procedures necessary to give an adequate interpretation and came away with, let's say, a sermon. And the other individual writes a sermon, but he didn't go through that. Okay? Now let's say there was a manuscript sermon. Each of them wrote manuscript, their sermons. Okay? And let's say that they were exactly the same words. The individual who poured himself into the study to arrive at it, will demonstrate more passion, more conviction, more confidence than the other individual. Right? It just naturally occurs. Okay? And when you come to the message saying, I think I know what this says, and therefore you preach a sermon based on that, as opposed to somebody coming to it saying, I know what this says, it's going to come across differently. Right? It does. I think that's important. Here he says, in the next to last paragraph here, exegesis is an acquired skill, like riding a bike or shooting free throws. It requires constant practice. It may seem awkward, tedious. It can seem tedious. You're going to see some of that. And mechanical, you're going to see some of that before it becomes second nature. However, the more you do, the more confident and confident you become. It's an acquired skill. Acquired means something you have to gain, you have to get, right? And usually when we acquire something in our economy, we end up paying for it, right? Well, you got to pay for something here. Not only your tuition, that's given up. You got to pay for it in personal, commitment, right? Work, sweat, pain, and all that. That's not all bad, don't get me wrong. There's some good stuff. That's not all of that, too. It's some exciting stuff. But you pay for it by your own pouring yourself into the thing. Okay? And it's a skill. It's something that isn't, you would say, well, gee, you've been doing this. I mean, you must be a natural. Some people say that to me sometimes when they say, oh, well, reading Hebrew, you read that so easy and everything. It must be natural. I mean, it must be, you were just born that way. Well, no, I wasn't born that way. Okay? Matter of fact, I flunked English. I flunked English twice running. I was trying to graduate from college and trying to pass freshman English. Slipped right in the sea this evening. Okay? Right? It's something that is not just necessarily just simply an innate thing. You were born with it, you're going to be good at it. That's not to say there isn't something within different individuals. Some people kind of more in tune to this kind of thing than that kind of thing. That's true. I am not mechanically inclined. When I try to fix something, I usually have to take it to somebody who's competent and have them to fix my mistakes. Okay? So I'm not mechanically inclined. That's not an innate ability of mine. Okay? Same token, I could learn how to be a better mechanics fixing my bike. I could do that. I can learn that. You see. And so some people may be able to grasp the intricacies of Hebrew a little faster than other people. Maybe they're kind of wired in a way that helps them to grasp it quicker, right? That may be a given, but it's not a given that other people can't acquire it. Not necessarily innate ability, but acquire the skill and the ability. I remember going through college at Moody Bible Institute Greek class. There was this one student. His name McDonald was his last name. Yes, McDonald. We'd go through the Greek course and come time for the test or the final or something, and I'd pour myself into the study. Going through the cards and learning this and learning that, and word. He didn't spend an hour on stuff, get straight A's, right? I got A's too, but I worked for it. He didn't work, but he got the A's too. He could just stick it in there and pour it out the other end. But you know what? 2 weeks later, he don't even remember what it was all about. He lost it too, right? He lost it as fast as he gained it. Now, I think sometimes in teaching these languages that the individual, if they really got a passion to learn it, they're better off not being able to grasp it instantly, but having to work at it to keep it. The individual who comes easy is also easy to lose. So I think there's some benefits to not having the ability to remember everything at once you read it. I'd like to have a photographic memory. But anyway. Let's look at any questions on that chapter. I thought it was a good chapter. A lot of philosophical stuff in there. Orientation kind of stuff, of course. But any questions or comments? Or
I know that's when you were talking about we were going through the hypothetical of the seminary educated person that doesn't use their Hebrew text anymore. And, that was one of the real things I think about is when I go to my Greek or Hebrew text and I think, who am I to disagree with these people that have, gone before me? And I know that, talk about that confidence, and I still don't foresee 2 classes from now, 4 seminars later that I will, now I'm okay, I can disagree with those people. And so I know that's still, that issue still is in the back of my mind. It doesn't mean I can't go back and see where they got it and be able to, say, well, maybe they took this for some reason or another, but, to go and disagree is still pretty daunting for me to think I can do.
That's understandable. Let me put it in a different context, however. You can have 2 individuals, both of them absolutely brilliant, with 14 doctorates behind their name, each of them. Same school, same everything, right? And you give them the same text to interpret, okay? And you can have them coming out with 2 different interpretations. You say, how could that be? Same brain power, same skill level, right? Well, it could very easily be an individual whose methodology contains 5 principles, and another individual whose methodology contains 10 principles. Right? In other words, looking at the text from 10 different perspectives as opposed to 5 different perspectives. Right? The person who looked at it from 10, probability is that they've gained some data, some information that they utilize that the other person could not see. So a lot of times the issue is not so much brain power, written 47 books, but a lot of the times the issue isn't so esoteric as that. Sometimes it's down basically to question of method, okay? Methodology. When you read a commentary, you get 2 of them, okay? Same passage and 2 different interpretations. If you're reading it for their conclusions, you're not using a commentary properly. You don't care what they conclude, frankly. You want to know how they got there. That's what you want to know. How did they get there? Okay? And then evaluate their conclusion, if you will, based upon your knowledge of what needs to be done in an adequate methodology to arrive at a conclusion. Credible conclusion. See? And therefore, what I'm suggesting to you, is that our method is trying our best to be comprehensive, right? In other words, cover just about everything we can imagine to cover, okay? Not just the stuff that comes up all the time, but everything, okay? So we have a grasp of a comprehensive method. With that grasp, I can then go and evaluate what other people have done, and I can say, well, gee, they didn't investigate the historical dimension of this aspect, or they didn't look into the syntax of these verbal ideas, or the law consecutive here. Didn't take that into account. You see what I say? With that ability, understanding of a complete method, I can evaluate, right? And therefore, I can be more confident. See? So I don't think you need to apologize. But there's one other aspect to it, and that is skill. One of the aspects of skill development, of course, is knowledge, right? I mean, you have to have some of that. And then the other aspect is what? Well, applying the knowledge and doing it. But there's one third dimension of it that sometimes you kind of forget about. And that third dimension is time itself. Right? In other words, I got this knowledge, I got the skills, I do my exegesis on passage A. I've been faithful, so I've been doing exegesis then for a few years. And I come back to passage A 5 years later, look at my notes and say, how in the world did I ever get there? How conclude that way? You see, it was wrong, and so I changed it, right? Well, what happened? Simply what happened was, with more that is done, the more experience you have behind it, the better you're able to evaluate certain things that you couldn't before. It was stuck in your head when you really didn't have it there in a evaluative way, you see. So that's another aspect of it. So don't give up just because, gee, I made a mistake last week. I guess I won't ever preach again. That's not it, is it? Right? That's not it. I don't know if it helps you or not, but frankly, I wouldn't be apologetic at all. And that's one of the reasons why one of my pet peeves about some of the books that we see on exegetical method for pastors and students and pastors, typically, the exegesis. You see one of the books, for instance, has the first part of the book, here's a complete method. Okay, now here's the cut down method over here for people who don't have a lot of time, you see. Well, the problem is, if there's a legitimate cut down method and I don't have a lot of time either, am I going to go to the full-blown thing? No way. Right? And therefore, not only that, if it's legitimate to cut it down, probably legitimate to cut some more of it down for mom. My Bible is a doorstop. I've cut it down pretty far, right? Okay. Well, I think we need to be comprehensive in our task. There's a way to deal with the time element and still be working properly with the method without going to that top-down method. Okay. Well, we probably need to take a break before we continue on. Oh, before we do that, let me just make a couple comments about this chapter. We won't walk through a whole lot of it on the tools chapter. This chapter here, translation aids, okay, we know about those. I would certainly recommend for your reading pleasure Armstrong, Busby, and Carr, because it helps you to saves a lot of time. Okay. That's a good translation aid. If you don't have it, saves a lot of time. Lexical tools, of course, there are a lot of good word study books out there. Lexical tools. They all are good and they all have weaknesses, but still today, the primary lexicon today, still for the English-speaking world, still is Brown Driver Briggs. It's old, okay, but it still is the primary one for the English-speaking world. Now, Rick as he talks about Peter Baumgartner here, but one of the things he says about it was, gee, it'd be advantageous for every interpreter to have it. Unfortunately, its exorbitant price will be prohibitive for most pastors and students. Well, that's true. Okay. There's ways around the shortfall of the BDB, though. Okay. All right. Okay. And then grammatical and syntactical tools he talks about. Gusenius, Couch, Cowley is still, again, he calls it the Cadillac of Hebrew grammars on page 17. Well, it still is the primary full-blown grammar for Hebrew for the English-speaking world. It still is. Okay. The others that he's mentioned here, Juan, well, that isn't as complete as Gusenius, and Walke and O'Connor certainly isn't. As a matter of fact, if he's in this last statement, for matters of syntax, interpreter finds more up-to-date works, and the most up-to-date one he mentions, of course, are the Walke and Juan one there, listed above, more user-friendly and readable. Let me tell you, maybe Juan is a little more user-friendly, but Walke, let me tell you, though it's a good book, you've got to have a linguistic background to be able to grasp some of this. It's difficult. He's got it difficult there. Introduction to Biblical Hebrew Syntax. Did you use that at all with Stanley? Okay, I was talking to a person who graduated from Dallas Seminary who majored in Old Testament. That was his major, Old Testament. And when this came out, I got a copy, of course, and I read it and all that. And I asked him about, what do you think about this? He's got a doctorate in Old Testament from, And he said, yeah, I can't understand that. That's what he said. Yes. It's hard. It's good, but it's difficult reading. Okay, computer tools, we know about it. You all got computers, right? And you all got some sort of computer tool. I got the Bronx on here. What do you guys got?
The Bronx.
Good. I'm going to use that. Okay, we'll use some of that. That's as far as we'll take the book today. Let's take a break. Introductory stuff here, which should be easy enough to be able to find for you there. Okay. We're going to spend a lot of time on this. Okay. As you already know, of course, the Hebrew for us, that is, Westerners, in the typical seminary, Hebrew is much harder for most seminarians than Greek.
I believe it.
Even though, as you probably now know full well, it's much simpler language from the standpoint of grammatical stuff. And the reason for that, of course, is because it's an Eastern opposed to a Western orientation. And that's why it's so difficult. Okay? So, your skill level, in other words, at this level for Hebrew, which is that now what, your third, no, fourth course?
Fifth.
Fourth. Is this the fifth course? Yeah. Your skill level at this fifth course in Hebrew may not be as high as your skill level at the fifth course in Greek.
Good. I was going to mention that. I feel significantly further behind now than I did at this point in Greek.
Yeah, and that's typical. Okay. That isn't anything that's going to be disastrous in any way. But it is typical, so you ought not to feel like you're somehow behind the 8 ball or something on this. Okay, so here's the basic outline, which was a little modifications, of course, of the principles of exegesis. These universal principles, what we mean by that term is that this term is used in all the parts of the Hebrew Bible. Then this kind of study, reading a text, historical studies, etc. Okay? The genre-specific principles, obviously, you only have to deal with a narrative literature, only a narrative, right? Okay, those kind of things. But you use the universal principles when you do this other type of study, you see. So this is add more to it, if you will, or a different approach to it, but you don't forsake the universal principles when you do the genre stuff. Okay. So, all right. Here's some. I don't know if we've used this before or not in Greek class. I don't know. But here's some. This was all 1970. Actually, it's probably even more relevant today than it was in 1970. Seminarians of the current and coming generations may well become the most ignorant generation of preachers in the later history of the church. Why is that? Well, in part because the seminaries have decided, many of them, let's make language optional. Or if it's not optional, let's cut it down, let's cut it back. Okay? Making this language studies optional implies, of course, that it's only secondary importance in the training of the minister. Unfortunately, there are some denominations that actually believe it to be the case anyway. Okay, otherwise they wouldn't eliminate it. You know, but evangelical should be a different story for evangelicals. You see, what should be the reason? The most significant reason why we should not abandon the study of the languages for evangelicals. That's it again. The inerrancy of Scripture. We believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. Plenary and verbal. Verbal, right? And if we really believe it, then we need to get down into the real words of the original, right? To be able to do such things as evaluate translations and everything else we've been talking about. Okay? Here it is. If we believe that God has inspired the writing of His Word will also illuminate to our hearts and souls and lives, and obviously the first requirement for writing divine virtues can be to know the Word in its all original glory. And one of the aspects that I point out to for you is this phrase here, original glory. Okay? There is some original glory that loses itself in a translation. Okay? And we'll see that, I think, this time. Okay, well, we, of course, are not going to be indicted because we're going to do it right. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Okay, reading the text. Here's some bibliographical things. There's a few things that may be different here, then in your, they may have added a couple of things here. Armstrong, Busby, and Carr, of course, we just read about in our book. That's the one I'm talking about. Of course, vocabulary cards, these are things that you may or may not use. Okay, that is, this method may not be your way to deal with the reading of the text by learning vocabulary. I was never really good at memorizing words out of context. I was much better when I had a context to work with. A couple of reasons for it, I think, but one of them is simply there's more motivation for it when you're in a context. The purpose. Now we're talking about reading the text. Okay, the purpose for reading the text. What we need to get, and I'll just say it out front, and then we'll walk through what it says in the notes a little bit. But the bottom line is this, I think. We need to have an original language context as we work through the passage. Okay? Here's how typically it works. We're going to make sure we do the exegetical thing right when we prepare a sermon. We're going to look at the Hebrew text. We're actually going to translate it, believe it or not. And we're going to do some exegetical work. So here's what happens. You see, I say, okay, I've got the basic translation. I'm working on a verb, you see. Here's my thinking process. It says, what does that word mean again? What's the so you look up the dictionary. What does that word mean? Oh, yeah, it means that. You see. Okay. Now let's see. What case is this? This is a genitive. Now let's see. What kind of genitives are there? Oh, yeah, there's this one called description, and there's apposition, and let's see. Now, what do they mean again? You see what I'm saying? So you're working through that, right? And then you're trying to keep the meaning of the word there attached to it at the same time, you see. And then you ask the question, okay, now I got that, now, okay, which one of these three options, let's say, of syntax, is the right one here, you see? Well, now you don't have a context within which to make the decision, because you don't even remember what the other words in the context. You see what I'm saying? There's just no way you can adequately make a decision on that. You see, you need a Hebrew context to be able to define something, to be able to interpret these kind of things. You see, and that's what we often don't have, or students often don't have, is a Hebrew context. Okay, and put it in another way. With a Hebrew context, there's the ability to read the passage. And you've now read Psalms 1 a few times. Let's say you read Genesis 12, 1 to 3 a few times. I trust you can now do it. Okay? You got context within which to work. Okay? You can actually be in a communication with the text. In other words, it can talk to you as you talk to it, if you will. Okay? We do this all the time in English. We also don't use the terminology, but we do it all the time. We read a paragraph, okay? And if we have a question about what a particular phrase means in one part of a paragraph or one sentence, we don't stop and analyze it. We just keep reading. And lo and behold, what happens? It clarifies itself. It tells you what it meant. Okay? If you couldn't read the context, how can this tell you what I'm talking about here? You see? So reading the text is really important. There's different levels. Notice this. First, written speech consists of symbols. We already know this. Because we had first year Hebrew here. The bar means the word, the thing, and many other things, by the way. Adonai means Lord, Lord, and other things. These symbols have meaning. The word of the Lord, that relationship is a syntactical relationship. And that could mean many things. It could be the word that the Lord spoke, right? It could be the word that somebody said about the Lord, right? It could be a word that has the, what should we say, the characteristics of the Lord in the sense that it is a divine and, you know, that kind of a function. And there's other ways in which it could be. Okay? So, how are you going to determine all of that? Well, the context, the broader context is what happens to that, how it gets determined. Okay? And so you need to know, become familiar with, that's what the last course was all about, familiar with the syntax, right? Not necessarily, and I don't know, maybe you did. Maybe you memorized every syntactical possibility out there. Yes, you
lost it all. Lost it. Got it quick, lost it quick.
Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But the point is here is we need to know, familiar enough with that stuff so that if we see the terminology, oh yeah, you tell me what the term is, oh yeah, I know what that one means. Possessive genitive, oh I know what that one means. I may not be able to come with a list of 14 different uses of genitive, you know, but you say possessive, I know, oh apposition, yeah, I know how that works. You see what I'm saying? That's the concept. Yeah. And not only that, once you've gone through that, what you've done is you've learned something about the breadth of the possibilities here. So you have some awareness of where an issue may lie. You see what I'm saying? And so when you come to the text, you can use that awareness, you see, to say, yes, there is something I need to evaluate here. Okay? I don't remember exactly what specific point it is, but it's in this context here, you see. And that's how you can do it. Okay? I've said this over and over again, and I'll always say it. I don't think my mind will ever change on this. The single most important exegetical skill an interpreter can develop is the ability to read the text. More important than knowing every little nuance of Hebrew grammar, even the reason why every vowel shifts. More important is the ability to read the text. Not that other stuff is unimportant, but the most important skill, the ability to read the text. You could know every grammatical issue in Gesenius, Couch, and Cowley, and quote the whole book. Right? And you read a text and not be able to figure out for certain what in the world this says and what it means. So what we need to do is to master the forms and symbols. That's how you get to the ability to read the text. Master the forms and symbols, vocabulary, syntactical possibilities, so that you can then converse with the text. And that's why I said to you, you need to read, know, be able to sight read some of these texts that the Lord works in. These are little hyperlink things. Whoop. Too big. There we go. There's an example. Later on in the book, I think I have this one in there for you. Okay, I'm not sure exactly which it was, but look at this one. Poetic texts can be self-interpreted. In fact, more often than not, they are. And the problem is that readers in the Old Testament are not always attuned to the poetic elements. Micah 3:4, a good example here. The New American Standard, as well as the NIV, adequate represents the words of the original Hebrew with one possible exception, the word because. New American Standard reads, "They will cry out to the Lord, but He will not answer them. Instead, He will hide His face from them at that time because they have practiced evil deeds." Now stop and think about that for a second. You know? These people are going to cry out to the Lord and He's going to ignore them. Why? Because they did sin. Now, wait a minute. That doesn't seem to compute. I mean, doesn't the Bible teach someplace along that if you really cry out to the Lord in repentance, He's going to hear you and listen to you? Right? And even forgive those sins that you did. Right? It don't seem to quite compute there, you see. Why is this going on? Well, let's look at it. First, there's 4 lines developed chiastically around the subject of the verbs. They, God, God, they. Chiastically. A, B, B prime, A prime. That pattern, okay? Bollinger, we'll talk about him a little later on. We'll get into figures of speech more, but he says that chiasmus is used in the most solemn and important portions of the Scriptures. By the way, it's used a lot. In this verse, the corresponding lines interpret one another. In other words, will not answer in line 1, or line 2, I guess it is, explained by will hide his face in line 3. Okay. Caius turns back to his disobedient people, and Caius lines 1 and 4 interpret one another. That's how Caius would work. Okay. So, in this case, we better to adjust the translation of 4 to read, while they keep doing evil. Now, let's stop for a second and dealing with our reading of the text issue, because I didn't deal with everything here. Okay? One is, I'm emphasizing here, this little particle called share, which can use temporal or causal instead to take a temporal. But notice, they have practiced evil deeds. Right? Well, now, look at my translation. While they keep doing evil. Now, there's a difference related to the syntax of the verb. Mm-hmm. Is there a possibility? You see, is it in the realm of possibility? Yeah, it is. But the point I'm making here is simply in the reading of the text where you have that awareness. You see what I'm saying? So I'm aware that part of the problem is in the past tense. Well, my issue that I raised. Well, then is that necessary that it's past tense? You see? And it's not. Okay. So the Hebrew then, Kal can either be temporal, causal, we were talking about that. It does not appear reasonable to think that the evil deeds were the cause for their praying. In other words, take it chiastically, right? They will cry out to the Lord because they have practiced evil deeds. Well, you'd say, well, yeah, and they repented. That makes sense. I did evil, I really feel bad, I cry out to the Lord, but it doesn't compute in the middle. When God says, no forgiveness, no listening, you're doomed. That don't seem to work. Okay, right? So anyway, the bottom line is here that I want to get at is for our purposes now, is that this reading of the text, okay, involves a lot of different things, but certainly what it does involve is for the text to communicate with you, and you then to look at the grammatical and exegetical possibilities. Of course, there's a lot here in this case. Poetry involved, okay, to come to a reasonable interpretation, okay. So it seems reasonable to interpret differently, okay, and to say that in this case, the New American Standard as well as the NIV don't have it quite right. It doesn't seem to work. Okay, well, anyway, bottom line is it's just simply we need to be able to have the text talk to us. Okay? What was you looking for the passage? That was Micah 3:4. Huh? I think that's what it was. Yeah. 3:4, yeah, Micah 3:4. Okay. So how do you get to this point where you can master the text? Well, there's a lot of different ways, of course. And most of it involves remembering something, remembering the words, remembering the form, blah, blah. I've dealt with this. I've used this in teaching Hebrew, but of course we're beyond that now. But you can actually learn the key forms in a few easy. What is it? I think it comes out 2, 4, 6, 8. And 15, one semester. You know, I've actually used that in a semester's course, and it worked out pretty good. I learned the key forms, okay, to be able to translate. Vocabulary is another issue. Vocabulary is much more difficult in Hebrew than it is in Greek, Latin, some of those other languages. Okay, and why is that?
Not as many words cross over.
Not as many words cross over.
Similar to English.
Oh yeah, right. There's not very many. There's a few that not very many. Okay, there's something that's more basic to the language, the nature of the language, though, that makes it more difficult.
The letters don't look like anything we've never seen before.
No, not those books of the letters.
Backwards.
Not the backwards aspect.
Sounds.
Not the sounds. Well, actually, in part, it's sound.
I think.
It's the fact that it's a triliteral language. By that I mean what?
Primarily 3.
Most words are based on 3
Consonants.
letters. How many letters are there? Consonants. How many consonants?
26.
22.
Or 22.
Yeah, right. You can vary 22 consonants, but there's going to be, at some point in time, you're going to run out of possibilities here. Okay. So what happens is, a lot of times, what you've done in this language is you've taken one word or one combination of letters and you expand the meanings of those. Right? So you don't create new words that look differently by adding another letter in front and one on the back or anything like that. Okay? You just expand the meaning of the word. So that you have the word yod means what? Zero delta and hand. But it also means power. It also means on the shore of a sea. It also means there's all boundaries, metaphorically and otherwise. It means a lot of different things. Davar means what? Word, but also name, manner of life. There's all kinds of stuff, right? Okay. So you learn one word. Yeah, you learn the word in a card and it gives you 1 or 2 possibilities, but in reality, sometimes none of them may work, Right? It's not to say it's not helpful, but it just makes it more difficult. And not only that, there's about 10,000 words plus in the Old Testament. And a large portion of those are 1 or 2 time uses. Alright? Meaning that you're almost always going to bump into something that you don't remember. If it took you 10 times to bump into it before you remember it, okay? Let's say you're reading your Hebrew Bible through, how many times, how long would it take you to remember it? Okay. Quite a few, right? So anyway, that's one of the reasons why that lexicon, that reader's lexicon, is so beneficial. Okay. And that one there is helpful as well. Einstein. Okay. It's very similar. In fact, that came out before the reader's lexicon. I used to use that before the other one came out. And that will get you the DVD too, of course. So there's various ways in which people have tried to learn these things, and I just listed some here. Some, I got one extra one from what you said. The line method, that was very similar. One person found that helpful, that person I wrote it down. You know, read 5 lines today, and I'll read 5 lines tomorrow, but I'm going to back up and just repeat. So that presumes that by the time you've read it 2 or 3 times, you pretty much got it. Well, some people may work for them. Card method, as one guy who said, I just take a 3x5 card every time I don't know a meaning of word, write it on a card. I go up and look it up, the meanings, and I memorize the card. Some people that works, some people that can't. World list method, and this was one course that was a little easier to use and makes cease and desist.
Yep. For a second.
Okay.